Hey everybody, it's Justin from Bittner Belts, and if you saw my xTool F1 Ultra review video, you know that I didn't have the conveyor belt yet. So this whole video is dedicated to the conveyor. Now, is a accessory worth a whole video on? In this case, yes, because while I'm very excited for this machine and it has done well and all the stuff that I've put it through, this is the game changer one, at least for me and many of you out there. If you use batch processing on some other camera-based machines like my P2, for example, it's okay, but it still has a lot of corrections that I have to do before I start the job. This has to be 100% perfect because there is no intervention once this starts going. I'm going to make one item and then it's going to keep advancing and making more, no matter how it's oriented and things. So if it's not accurate, if it's not really doing a good job with this, then it's a fail. So I'm very, very excited to test this out. If it is a win, there's a lot of benefits for this in batch processing. So I have high hopes. Now, obviously, I was given these for free. So you expect me to be a cheerleader? Well, just like I did in this video, I put all the questions to the Facebook community in xTool. So people told me what they want me to test, what materials to use, and even questions like from Joe Jasko. He said, make it fail. So I said, okay, we'll make it fail. Not in a bad way. We want to understand what the proper way to use this thing is and then understand its capabilities and what not to do, of course, because that'll just waste material. Like, obviously, overlapping things is a no-no. But I will do all these things, and I will put all my data down at the bottom, including the times it took me to do these things, just to educate you. Let the data decide for you, not my opinions, okay? So if the data that I show you works out for your workflow, awesome. If it doesn't, there are plenty of lasers in the sea. But I do think this is a pretty good machine, so I have high hopes for good results in this video. Let's get to the testing today on Bittner Belts. This is all that was inside the box: the conveyor belt itself, the data cable, screwdriver, baggie of screws, and 2 of the mounting brackets that we'll use. The shipping box was 44 by 15.5 inches. The size of this unit is 39.5 inches by 11.5 inches. The conveyor right here feels like a grocery store conveyor. It's got grip to it, but not too much. You can see that there are 2 lines right here. This is from seaming. It feels smooth right here. As I advance it, there's no other seaming other than when it put itself back together. It's all powder-coated aluminum construction. Throughout, it has rubberized feet on here. And then at the corners, you'll notice that there is this C-shaped piece. This is plastic. And so I'm betting this is the cap that hides the availability to take off the rollers and replace this belt if needed, should any serious damage occur to it. On the conveyor, I currently have 1 black business card followed by 5 black business cards. Black business cards were asked to be run because there's very little contrast between the conveyor and the card itself. I wanted to use this as the first test to show how the software processes everything. So let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit here. Now if we go over to the computer, I have the 1 business card on the screen. I'm clicking refresh, it's there. All right, good enough for a test. All right, here we go. So first off, you can notice that I have 2 different layers here. So I have a black and blue layer. So I'll go to frame out material, and it sees my business card. But when I go to hit process, it gives me an error that there is more than 1 object on the canvas. So before I start this process, when you're batching, you need to combine everything. So I'm clicking the combine button. Now everything is blue. So when I go over to process, it now is okay with that. It's going to take a look at the first card. Sees it there. And now I can go ahead and click start. Now, it did not engrave on 2 of the cards that we put up there. I would rather it skip something if it detects that something's off. So If it doesn't feel that it's perfectly going to be able to complete the job and it skips it, that is definitely better than it trying to complete a job and maybe it being half cut off or off-centered or different things like that. So I don't see that as a bad thing. I see it as a big positive. All the ones that were engraved exactly in the exact same place all the way across the field. So good results on the first test. The next test we're going to do is try to determine the max speed of the conveyor itself. A lot of people were asking about that. Now, ultimately, it's going to be determined by the speed to which you are engraving your item before the conveyor will even bother advancing to the next thing. That is with the exception of with long pieces, and we will test that later, but I wanted to just test with small pieces. So what we're going to do is run at 10,000 MMS one line on this and just have it advance. So I'm interested to see more of the processing time between each advance and then engraving before it advances again. I'll be running a clock down at the bottom just so you can see as well, just in case I speed up the video. So as you can see, it was about 11 seconds in between the completion of an engraving as it would move up the next item, detect the item, see exactly how it had to position the engraving, and then start that engraving. Engraved 10 coasters and all of them came out great. On the 8 that were engraved, of course if this wasn't a test I would have thrown some poly on there, but 2 of these it just refused to do. So it refused it and I kept putting them back in and it kept saying no. And really what I think it was you can see there's a big chip away section here as well as on this one. I think it just interpreted these as incorrect shapes in compared to these other ones that don't seem to have that, although this one has a really big thing there. But for whatever reason, it didn't like these 2, but it didn't try to engrave on them. When I went through this, I tried to actually have them off-center so that they were not on the camera. I tried to put them directly touching each other a couple times, and it seemed not to have any issue with it whatsoever. I'm interested in seeing if we can do 2 different objects at the same time. So I've copied this, putting it on both. Let's go ahead and frame out material. When we frame out, it's showing that we have both images here. Over in the instructions, it wants you to only have one, but I want to see if it'll do both. So I have one on each. Let's go ahead and hit process. And it says that I have more than one object on the canvas. I'm going to delete one of them and just see if actually, we're going to leave it with the other 2. Let's see what happens when I hit process. It'll give us a preview. If it's going to be off, I'm not even going to bother running it. Yeah, so we only have one engraving here, even though we have 2 objects on the field. Let's see if we frame out material. Let's actually throw it over here like this for some reason and see what happens. So it's saying our object is not within the material. So let's try it again. Process. Again, we're only getting one. So yeah, you're only going to be able to engrave one type of object, one individual shape at a time. You're not going to be able to engrave different letters on each one. Let's say, I know there was a person earlier in the Facebook groups that had said, oh, I do lots of different dogs, so I would like to have a different dog on each one. Unfortunately, that's not going to work in this fashion. I'm sure there's a jig possibility, but not like this. Somebody asked if I could emboss while on the conveyor. So I have this 3D height map right here that I could emboss with. When I go over to mode, you either have conveyor batch, conveyor large, or embossing. So unfortunately, I don't think at the current time that's something I can do. If I go over to use conveyor batch and then I select my material and go to processing type. I only have the option for engraving. I don't have the option for embossing, unfortunately. So I just spent the past couple hours running 30 stress tests on here. It was more than I planned, and it kind of snowballed. I'm actually refilming this right now so I can talk about it more in depth. I'll montage it while I'm going here. There's a couple key takeaways that I got from these stress tests. What I did was I cut out 100 of a whole bunch of different shapes in different sizes. What I wanted to do was run just tons of material through here at the same time and see if I could overload the camera. Would the camera be able to process 100 pieces at one time? I don't know. So that was the goal. I started off with really, really small S shapes, and these are only 7 millimeters, and it really didn't like these. And so I thought at first I had too many on there, and I kept pulling away. But in the end, it's actually the shape and the size. That's really what mattered, not how much material I had on there. So it didn't like a really small, complex shape. I then went to 15 millimeters, and it would engrave about 10% of these, but skip the rest. And then when I went to a 25 millimeter sized version, which this is still very small, it is just the top portion of my finger here, it would engrave about 90% and skip 10% on this. It really comes down to the size of this complex shape. Now, when we talk about simple shapes, circles, rectangles, stars, hearts, squares, things like that, it can do very small versions of this. This is 10 millimeters, 100% will engrave. I then did some 6 millimeter by 17 millimeter little rectangles. These are those medical alert bracelets. I only had 5, so I engraved on it really light and just kept running it through and putting them in different orientations and stuff. Got it every single time, upside down, whatever. So it can do very small charms, let's say like bracelet charms, but you might have some difficulty if it is a awkward thin shape as opposed to something that has some area in it that is easy for the camera to understand this is a shape. Next, the tests that I did, I ran at least 2,000 pieces of material through here because I have 100 of each. I ran them multiple times. I flipped them over, used the other side. In all the tests, I had 0 incorrect engravings. It either skipped it or did it correctly on everything. So accuracy, we're going to keep trying to make it mess up. Trust me, we're going to keep going. But 2,000 pieces is a lot of pieces for it not to mess up on. Admittedly, I ran 2,000 pieces through, and because it was a stress test, I probably only engraved 1,000 times, but 1,000 times is pretty good. Let's continue testing, but I just wanted to throw it out there that after all of this little stuff, like the accuracy I feel is here. You might have some outlying situations where it cuts something off, but overall, I think you're going to be able to batch out a lot of stuff accurately every time. And that is what everybody wants to know about this. Let's go ahead and set up a longer engraving. So this is a 20-inch or 500 millimeter piece of wood. That is the maximum length that you can use on this conveyor. I did think, well, what if I make some rollers or something over here to have longer material? But you can't do that. It regulates inside the software. It will not let you add anything that is bigger than 500 millimeters here. So that is your maximum, just so you understand that. We are also going to take a look at how fast we can get this going. On the software, you'll see that I made a red box that's 500 millimeters by the width of my wood here. That way I have a good representation off of the camera space of where my wood should be. Of course, I'm going to take my tape measure and I'm going to measure from the side of this wood to the side of the conveyor belt in multiple spots to make sure that I am square as it progresses up the conveyor. I don't want it coming up crooked. It's the exact same thing that you would want to do if you were using like the conveyor on the P2, for example. Now I'm making sure that this box is listed as no output, and I'm going to engrave Happy 4th on this one. I made sure that my Happy 4th fit just inside of the space because I want to make sure that we're able to use that entire 500 millimeters of length. Okay, so after it was finished, it pulled it back to its start position, which is exactly where it was with just barely the laser right on there. This whole engraving took 5 minutes 47 seconds, but that's based on the settings that I put on here. So let's flip this over. Let's line it back up again. And then what I want to do is I'm just going to put one score line all the way down and run this at the fastest it can possibly go, because I'm interested to see if the conveyor can keep up with the fastest speed that this machine can put out. Inside the software, we have a power of 100, a maximum speed of 160 if we are under the score setting. If we switch that over to the engrave setting, we can go to a max speed of 3000. I'm going to run the same Happy Fourth on craft paper. The recommended settings for that, for engraving it, would be 90% power, 750 speed. I'm going at 1500 speed, 100% power. It might be a light engraving, but I'm more interested in showing the speed of the conveyor. I was asked to do a larger engraving, so this is a 8.5 by 11 sheet of black acrylic. I did a photo engraving on. My file, I needed to have a little bit more contrast. These are my two sons. We went fishing, and so it's a very bright picture, and so I think I needed a little bit more contrast, but you can tell that the resolution is really nice in there. It came out really cool. Definitely could have used more contrast. But this is one of those engravings where you're like, you start the job and you're like, oh geez, I should have changed the settings a little bit. This took 6 hours. This was a very long engraving. I also used a piece of aluminum here because I went edge to edge, so I knew I was going to bleed over. I did not want to engrave on the belt itself, so I put a protective covering down here. Make sure you do that if you're going to do something like this, because you obviously don't want to permanently mark this up. It could affect the camera's ability to recognize objects when it does batch processing. So I did the speed tests with the long products. There's really no other tests for me to do with this because this does not utilize the camera system like the batch process does. If I put other materials on here, it's not going to see it. It's not going to affect anything. So really, we only have the 500 millimeter distance that we can utilize on this, and it's just like using the pass-through rotary on the P2 or the S1. It's very simple to use. Now, this isn't conveyor based, but it is F1 Ultra based and F1 as well. I just wanted to throw this out to you because I was just doing this in between tests. A member of the Facebook groups, Carl Johnson, he asked me, could I send you this metal, this track and field metal, and can you see if the Ultra will engrave on it? My F1 cannot engrave this, and it's weird because it's made of metal. The IR laser should be able to do it. So I tried, and I could burn it up at the top at a really slow and low speed, but it just wasn't reacting like it should. And it dawned on me, this must be coated in something that's organic. So maybe like a plant-based compound is on this metal. So I ran it with one pass on the diode setting to strip the organic compound off, and then I ran 2 passes with the fiber, and I got a perfect engraving after that. This is something that only a machine that has both a diode and a fiber could easily do. Of course, you could switch them between machines, but you're going to spend a long time lining these things up. Whereas on here, it only took me 1 minute 30 seconds because it just went from layer to layer to layer, switching between the diode and the fiber as it went. So just want to let you know that's a very interesting use case. It's definitely going to be few and far between, but it might come up for you like it did for Carl. So what are my final thoughts on the xTool F1 Ultra's conveyor system? Accuracy. Accuracy is the name of the game. If this was not accurate, this would not be a buy. In all of my tests, I did not have a single misaligned product. It either did it perfectly or it skipped it. Now I had tons of skips, but I was also stress testing. When you're running it, just normally putting things on here, running it through, you're going to have 0 to 10% of skips. And if that happens, you just grab it from over here and put it right back here, and you're back in business. Some things, though, like the slate coasters, they have manually chipped sides all the way around, and so inevitably they are a little bit different shaped than each other. It erred on caution in that, and it skipped some more than others. So my way to fix that was then I just took that one that it kept skipping and mapped it based on that one, and then it finished engraving those as well. It was a couple extra steps, but it wasn't a huge deal. And again, I like that it errs on the safe side. There was one YouTuber who did get a mis-engraved piece that was like half in, half out. I couldn't get it to recreate that. All of this is done up on the cloud. So that 11-second delay that we saw between when it would do here and then advance from the next section is it taking a picture, sending it up to the cloud, processing it, sending it back down again. So xTool is definitely going to keep improving that server system up there. Again and again, the more materials that are going through there, it's just going to keep learning. So it's only going to get better, but it is already very excellent. So I'm very excited to see where it goes in the future, let's say. Doing long processes, you are limited to 500 millimeters. You can't jury rig extra things to make it go longer. The software will not allow it. It moves at 3000 MMS. That is more than fast enough. I mean, I'm engraving this at 250, so you're really not going to be hindered. I understand this is 10,000. You're not going to be engraving a big thing at 10,000. It's not going to be an issue. 25-pound weight capacity is more than enough unless you're doing like heavy cast iron stuff. So I know you expect me to say good things. I have nothing but good things to say. I'm sure some people will get annoyed by skips, but again, I'll take it as long as it's not messing up my material. And in reality, when you're using it the way you should be using it, the skips will be on the very infrequent side. I hope you got a lot of good information from this video. If you did, it would really help me if you like and subscribe. That's what helps me grow my channel. And as always, stay safe in the shop. I'll see you in the next one.